He was just a single father trying to make ends meet, working double shifts at a diner in a forgotten corner of America, counting every dollar twice before spending it once. She was a young mother clutching 2 toddlers to her chest, standing in the pouring rain outside a closed pharmacy at midnight, desperation carved into every line of her face. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When their worlds collided on that stormy Tuesday evening, neither of them could have imagined that a simple act of human decency would unravel a web of corporate secrets worth billions, challenge one of the most powerful pharmaceutical empires in the world, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the smallest gestures of kindness. This isn't just a story about helping a stranger. This is about what happens when ordinary people discover they have the power to change everything, when love becomes stronger than money, and when the courage to do what's right creates ripples that reach further than anyone could ever dream. If you believe that one moment of compassion can rewrite destiny, that real heroes don't wear capes but aprons and work boots, and that the most powerful force in the universe isn't pharmaceutical patents or corporate boardrooms, but the fierce protection of a parent's love, then you're exactly where you need to be. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Millbrook, the kind of persistent downpour that seemed to wash the color out of everything, except the neon signs reflecting in puddles on Main Street. Tommy Rodriguez wiped down the last booth in Rosie's diner with movements that had become automatic after 18 months of the same routine. Spray, wipe, stack the salt and pepper shakers, check the sugar dispenser, move to the next table. The familiar rhythm kept his mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go, like the stack of overdue bills in his apartment or the conversation he'd avoided having with his 8-year-old daughter about why they couldn't afford the field trip to the science museum. At 32, Tommy had the kind of face that people trusted instinctively. Dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled, hands that were always clean despite working in a kitchen, and a way of listening that made customers tell him about their divorces and their grandchildren's graduations while he refilled their coffee cups. He'd been working the evening shift at Rosie since he'd moved to Millbrook, a small manufacturing town where everyone knew everyone else's business, but pretended they didn't. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but then again, most of life wasn't what anyone planned. The diner was nearly empty now, just old Frank at the counter nursing his 3rd cup of decaf and reading yesterday's newspaper for the 2nd time, and a trucker named Miguel who stopped by every Tuesday on his route between Chicago and Detroit. Tommy glanced at the clock above the coffee machine. 20 minutes until closing time, which meant he could be home by 11:30 if he hustled through the closing routine. His daughter Sophie would be asleep by then, but he always checked on her anyway, pulling her dinosaur comforter up to her chin and making sure her inhaler was on the nightstand where she could reach it. Sophie had inherited her mother's asthma, along with her stubborn streak and her ability to make Tommy laugh even when he felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. She was the reason he got up every morning, the reason he worked doubles when Rosie needed extra help, the reason he'd learned to braid hair from YouTube videos and could now make pancakes that looked like Mickey Mouse. She was also the reason he'd moved to Millbrook in the first place, leaving behind everything familiar in Phoenix when his ex-wife, Carmen, decided that raising a child was too much responsibility and disappeared one Thursday morning with a note on the kitchen table and her half of their savings account. Tommy had found Millbrook by throwing a dart at a map, quite literally. He'd been sitting in a truck stop in New Mexico, Sophie asleep in the backseat surrounded by everything they owned, when he'd asked the waitress for a map of the United States. He'd closed his eyes and thrown a penny at it first, but it had landed in the Gulf of Mexico. The dart had landed on a small dot in Michigan that he'd never heard of, and somehow that had seemed like as good a reason as any to start over. Millbrook had turned out to be the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and where the elementary school principal knew every student's name. It wasn't paradise, but it was safe, and safe was all Tommy had been looking for. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Tommy looked up from the booth he was wiping down. A woman stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin and shivering, with a toddler on each hip. Both children looked to be around 2 years old, identical except for their clothing. A boy in a blue rain jacket and a girl in yellow. The woman herself couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair plastered to her head and eyes that darted around the diner like a cornered animal's. She took one step inside, then seemed to think better of it and started to back toward the door. "Ma'am, you okay?" Tommy called out, setting down his cleaning rag. "You look like you could use somewhere warm to sit for a minute." The woman froze, her grip tightening on the children. Up close, Tommy could see that she wasn't just wet from the rain. Her face was pale, except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks, and her hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The little girl in yellow was crying softly, a tired, sick sound that made Tommy's chest tighten. The boy was unnaturally quiet, his thumb in his mouth and his eyes too big for his face. "We're closed," Frank announced from his spot at the counter, without looking up from his newspaper. "Says so right on the door." Tommy shot him a look that could have melted steel. "We're not closed yet, Frank. Still got 15 minutes. He turned back to the woman, keeping his voice gentle. "Why don't you come sit down? Get out of those wet clothes. I can put together some soup, maybe some hot chocolate for the kids." The woman swayed slightly, and for a moment, Tommy thought she might collapse right there in the doorway. "I don't have money," she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear her over the rain hammering against the windows. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come in. I was just looking for somewhere dry, and I saw the lights." "Hey, nobody said anything about money," Tommy replied, moving slowly toward her like she was a wild animal that might bolt. "You've got 2 little ones there who look cold and tired. That's all the reason I need. Come on, let's get you sorted out." The woman looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she took another step inside and let the door swing shut behind her. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I'm Maria. This is Carlos and Elena." "Tommy," he replied, gesturing toward the booth in the corner that was farthest from the windows and had the best view of the parking lot. He'd noticed that she'd chosen a table with her back to the wall in every diner he'd ever worked in. People who needed to see who was coming through the door were usually running from something. "Why don't you take that booth over there? I'll get some towels and see what I can rustle up in the kitchen." Maria settled into the booth with practiced efficiency, keeping both children close to her body. Tommy noticed that she helped them out of their wet jackets with movements that were careful and precise, checking their foreheads with the back of her hand and murmuring to them in Spanish. The little girl, Elena, had stopped crying but was making soft whimpering sounds that reminded Tommy of the way Sophie sounded when she was fighting off a cold. Carlos hadn't made a sound since they'd walked in, just watched everything with wide, serious eyes that belonged on someone much older. Tommy disappeared into the kitchen and returned with an armload of clean dish towels and 3 mugs of hot chocolate, the kind made with real milk and topped with marshmallows that Sophie always said looked like tiny clouds. He set them down on the table carefully, not wanting to startle anyone. "I've got some chicken soup warming up," he told Maria. "And there's crackers if the kids want something to nibble on." Maria wrapped her hands around the mug like it was an anchor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't pay you back. Not now, maybe not ever. We don't have anywhere to go, and I can't." "Stop right there," Tommy interrupted gently. "You don't owe me anything. Sometimes people just need help, and sometimes other people are in a position to give it. That's how the world's supposed to work." He could see Maria fighting back tears, her jaw clenched with the effort of keeping herself together. Elena had picked up a marshmallow and was examining it with the intense curiosity that only toddlers possessed, while Carlos continued his silent surveillance of the diner. Tommy noticed that both children stayed pressed close to their mother, even when they were reaching for their mugs, like they'd learned not to venture too far from safety. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Are you folks from around here? Tommy asked, settling into the booth across from them. He kept his voice casual, conversational, the same tone he used when regular customers wanted to chat, but weren't quite ready to share what was really on their minds. Maria shook her head. We're traveling. Or we were. Our car broke down about a mile from here, and everything just... She gestured helplessly with one hand while keeping the other wrapped around Elena's waist. I thought there might be a pharmacy open, but everything's closed, and the mechanic won't look at the car until tomorrow, and we don't have money for a hotel room, even if there was one. Tommy processed this information while watching Elena try to feed a marshmallow to her brother, who accepted it with the solemnity of a monk receiving communion. There was definitely more to the story than car trouble and bad timing, but he'd learned not to push. People told you what they needed you to know when they were ready to tell it. What kind of medicine do you need? He asked instead. I mean, if it's something basic, I might have it at home. Tylenol, cough syrup, that kind of thing. Maria's hand went instinctively to a small black bag that she wore across her body like a shield. It's insulin, she said quietly. I'm diabetic, and I ran out this morning. I thought we'd be somewhere with a pharmacy by now, but then the car, she trailed off, and Tommy saw her swallow hard. I should be okay until morning, but if something happens, if my blood sugar crashes... Tommy felt something cold settle in his stomach. He didn't know much about diabetes, but he knew enough to understand that insulin wasn't the kind of medicine you could substitute with whatever happened to be in someone's bathroom cabinet. How long can you go without it? He asked. I don't know, Maria admitted. I've never had to find out. My doctor always said to never let myself run out, but life doesn't always follow doctor's orders, does it? The bell above the door chimed again, and Tommy looked up to see Miguel finishing his coffee and pulling on his jacket. The trucker caught Tommy's eye and jerked his head toward the door. Storm's getting worse out there, amigo. They're saying on the radio that the interstate might flood near Junction 15. You folks be careful getting home. After Miguel left, the diner felt even smaller and more isolated. Frank had dozed off at the counter, his newspaper spread out in front of him like a blanket. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, and Tommy could hear the wind picking up, whistling around the corners of the building in a way that suggested the storm was far from over. Listen, Tommy said, making a decision that felt both completely natural and slightly terrifying. I've got a couch at my place, and my daughter's got bunk beds she never uses the top of. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry, and you could get some rest while we figure out what to do about the medicine situation. Maria stared at him like he'd just offered to give her the moon. I can't ask you to do that, she said. You don't even know us. We could be anyone, anything. You're a mother with 2 sick kids who needs help, Tommy replied simply. That's all I need to know. Besides, my daughter would never forgive me if I let you spend the night in a broken-down car in this weather. She's got very strong opinions about helping people. For the first time since she'd walked through the door, Maria smiled. It was a small, uncertain thing, but it transformed her entire face. How old is your daughter? 8 going on 30, Tommy said, grinning. Her name's Sophie, and she's probably going to want to adopt all 3 of you by morning. Fair warning. Maria looked down at her children, who had finished their hot chocolate and were starting to slump against her sides with exhaustion. Carlos had finally relaxed enough to rest his head on her shoulder, while Elena was fighting to keep her eyes open, making little humming sounds that might have been the beginning of a lullaby. "Okay," Maria said finally, "but just for tonight. And I'll pay you back somehow, I promise." Tommy was already standing up, reaching for his coat. "The only thing you owe me is the chance to help. Now let's get you folks somewhere warm before this storm gets any worse." As he locked up the diner and led Maria and the twins to his beat-up Honda Civic, Tommy found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Sophie the week before. She'd been upset because a boy at school had been teasing another kid about his old sneakers, and she'd wanted to know why people were mean to each other when being nice was so much easier. Tommy had told her that sometimes people forgot how to be kind, but that didn't mean she should stop trying. The best thing about good people, he'd said, was that they reminded everyone else what good looked like. Standing in the rain, helping. Maria buckled the twins into Sophie's old booster seats. Tommy thought that maybe his 8-year-old daughter was going to teach him just as much about kindness as he was trying to teach her. Sometimes the most important lessons came from the smallest teachers. The drive to Tommy's apartment took less than 10 minutes, but it felt longer with the storm raging around them and Maria's obvious tension filling the car. She kept checking on the twins, who had both fallen asleep almost immediately, their small faces peaceful in a way that suggested they hadn't felt truly safe in a long time. Tommy found himself glancing in the rearview mirror more than was probably necessary, partly to check on his passengers and partly because he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Maria's story than car trouble and bad luck. Tommy's apartment was on the second floor of a converted house on Maple Street, the kind of building that had been someone's family home before being divided into 4 units that were affordable for people like him. The rent was reasonable, the neighbors were quiet, and Mrs. Patterson downstairs didn't mind watching Sophie for an extra hour when Tommy's shift ran late. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Tommy had worked hard to make it feel like home. The babysitter, a teenager named Jessica who lived down the street, met them at the door with Sophie's backpack and a concerned expression. "Sophie's been asleep for about an hour," she reported quietly. "She finished her homework and ate all her vegetables, but she kept asking when you'd be home. I think the storm's making her nervous." Tommy handed Jessica her babysitting money and introduced her briefly to Maria and the twins. Jessica's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected guests, but she was polite and didn't ask questions. After she left, Tommy found himself standing in his small living room with 3 strangers, feeling suddenly awkward about the modest space he'd grown comfortable with. The couch was covered with one of Sophie's blankets. There were crayons scattered across the coffee table, and a half-finished puzzle of a dinosaur skeleton covered most of the floor. "Sophie's working on her paleontologist phase," Tommy explained, carefully stepping around the puzzle pieces. "Last month it was marine biology, before that volcanoes. She likes to be thorough." Maria was looking around the apartment with Anne. Expression Tommy couldn't quite read. It wasn't judgment, exactly, more like surprise. The twins were awake now, clinging to her legs and taking in their new surroundings with the careful attention of children who'd learned to assess every new situation for potential threats. Elena pointed at a framed picture on the side table, a photo of Tommy and Sophie at the county fair, both of them grinning and covered in cotton candy. "That's Sophie," Tommy said, following Elena's gaze. "She insisted we ride the Ferris wheel 5 times in a row. Said she wanted to see if the world looked different from up high." "Did it?" Maria asked softly. Tommy considered this. "Yeah, actually, it did. Everything looked smaller, more manageable. Like maybe the scary stuff wasn't as big as it seemed. From down here." He showed Maria to the bathroom and found clean towels for her and the twins. His first aid kit yielded children's Tylenol for their fevers and a thermometer that confirmed what he'd suspected. Both Carlos and Elena were running, temperatures that explained their listlessness and quiet behavior. While Maria got them changed into dry clothes, Tommy made up the couch with his best sheets and found extra blankets in the closet Sophie had designated as the treasure chest. "I'll take the floor," Maria insisted when she saw him arranging pillows. "On the couch. You've already done too much." "Nobody's sleeping on the floor," Tommy replied firmly. "This couch is actually more comfortable than my bed most nights. Sophie and I fall asleep watching movies on it all the time." It took some convincing, but eventually Maria settled onto the couch with the twins curled up on either side of her, all three of them looking like they hadn't relaxed in days. Tommy brought them water and crackers, checked that the twins' fevers were coming down, and made sure Maria had his phone number in case she needed anything during the night. "Tommy," Maria said as he was about to head to his bedroom, "why are you doing this, really?" Tommy paused in the doorway, considering how to answer a question that seemed to have layers he didn't fully understand. "A couple of years ago, when Sophie and I first got to town, we were pretty much where you are now. Different circumstances, but same feeling of being lost and scared and not knowing who to trust. Mrs. Patterson downstairs, she didn't even know. US, but she made us dinner every night for a week until I got my first paycheck. Said she remembered what it was like to be young and overwhelmed and trying to figure everything out alone." He was quiet for a moment, remembering those first difficult weeks in Millbrook when everything had felt impossible, and he'd wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake bringing Sophie so far from everything familiar. "I guess I figure the world works better when people look out for each other, especially people who know what it's like to need looking out for." Maria nodded, tears threatening again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Get some rest," Tommy replied. "Tomorrow we'll figure out the medicine situation and get your car looked at. Everything's going to be okay." As he settled into his own bed, listening to the storm continue its assault on the windows and the soft sounds of Maria talking quietly to the twins in the next room, Tommy found himself thinking about Mrs. Patterson's words from 2 years ago. She'd told him that kindness wasn't about having extra money or extra space or extra time. It was about recognizing when someone needed what you had to give, even if what you had didn't seem like much. Mrs. Patterson had been a widow on Social Security who lived in a one-bedroom apartment, but she'd had the ability to cook a decent meal and the wisdom to know that sometimes a hot dinner was the difference between hope and despair. Tommy didn't have much either, but he had a couch and some clean blankets and the knowledge of what it felt like to be scared and alone with a child depending on you. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The next morning arrived gray and subdued, the storm having blown itself out sometime before dawn and left behind the quiet that felt almost suspicious after the previous night's chaos. Tommy woke to the sound of children's voices in the living room, speaking in rapid Spanish, punctuated by giggles that suggested someone was feeling much better than they had the night before. He checked his phone and discovered it was nearly 8 o'clock, later than he usually slept, but it was his day off, and Sophie didn't have school because of a teacher training day. When he emerged from his bedroom, he found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the floor in her purple dinosaur pajamas, teaching Carlos and Elena how to sort puzzle pieces by color. All 3 children looked up when he appeared, and Sophie grinned at him with the satisfaction of someone who had just made 2 new best friends. "Daddy, look. Carlos is really good at finding the edge pieces, and Elena knows all the Spanish words for colors. Did you know that yellow is amarillo? It sounds like a song when you say it right." Maria was sitting on the couch, looking significantly better than she had the night before, but still pale and drawn around the edges. She'd managed to do something with her hair and was wearing clothes that Tommy didn't recognize, probably from whatever bag she'd been carrying when she'd arrived at the diner. She smiled when she saw him, but there was worry in her eyes that hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. "How's everyone feeling this morning?" Tommy asked, making his way to the kitchen and starting the coffee maker. Through the window, he could see that the parking lot was littered with broken branches and debris from the storm, but the sun was trying to make an appearance through the clouds. "Better," Maria replied, though she touched her black bag unconsciously as she spoke. "The kids' fevers broke around midnight. They're still congested, but they're acting more like themselves." Tommy poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to Maria, noting the way she checked her watch and the slight tremor in her hands that suggested her blood sugar was probably not where it should be. "How are you doing, though, with the... you?" "No," he gestured vaguely, not wanting to discuss medical issues in front of the children, but needing to know how urgent the situation was becoming. Maria lowered her voice. "I'm okay for now, but I need to find a pharmacy today. I called the one on Main Street when I woke up, but they don't open until 9, and they said they'd need to call my doctor to verify the prescription. That could take hours, maybe longer since it's a different state." Tommy frowned. "What happens if it takes too long?" "I'll be fine," Maria said quickly, but the way she said it suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "I'm good at managing my levels, and I have glucose tablets if things get bad. It's not a situation I want to be in for very long." Sophie had been listening with the intense concentration she applied to everything that seemed important, and now she looked up from the puzzle with a worried expression. "Are you sick?" she asked Maria directly. "Because my daddy knows lots of things about taking care of sick people. He took really good care of me when I had pneumonia last winter." "I'm going to be fine, sweetheart," Maria assured her. "Sometimes grown-ups just need special medicine to stay healthy, like how you might need medicine if you get a bad cold." Sophie nodded gravely, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her, then turned to Carlos and Elena. "Do you want to see my rock collection? I have 47 different kinds, and 3 of them might be meteorites." As the children disappeared into Sophie's bedroom, Tommy found himself alone with Maria for the first time since the previous evening. In the morning light, she looked younger than he'd first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd been carrying heavy responsibilities for longer than seemed fair. There was something else, too, a wariness that went beyond the immediate crisis with her medicine, like someone who'd learned to expect disappointment and was always prepared to run. "Tell me about the car," Tommy said, settling into the chair across from the couch. "What happened?" Maria sighed. "It just started making this horrible grinding noise yesterday afternoon, and then it started smoking, and I had to pull over. I don't know anything about cars, but the man at the gas station said it sounded like the transmission. He said it would probably cost more to fix than the car is worth." Tommy winced. Transmission problems were expensive, the kind of repair that could easily cost several $1,000s on an older vehicle. "What kind of car is it?" "A 2004 Honda Accord. It's got almost 200,000 miles on it, but it's been reliable until now. I bought it with everything I had saved up 6 months ago." Maria's voice caught slightly. "I know I should have had money set aside for emergencies, but things have been tight, and I thought..." "Hey," Tommy interrupted gently. "You don't need to explain yourself to me. Cars break down, life happens, and nobody's prepared for everything. The question is, where were you headed? Maybe there's someone you can call for help." Maria was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it might contain answers. "We were going to Denver," she said finally. "I have a job lined up there, or I did. I was supposed to start Monday, but I don't think that's going to happen now." "What kind of job?" "Childcare. There's a woman there who needed a live-in nanny for her 2 kids, and she was going to provide housing and health insurance. It seemed perfect, like exactly what we needed to start over." Maria's voice was flat, defeated. "I should probably call her and explain what happened, but I keep hoping maybe there's still a way to make it work." Tommy was quiet, processing this information. A live-in nanny position suggested that Maria was running from something more serious than just bad luck, and the fact that she'd been willing to move across the country with 2 toddlers indicated that staying wherever she'd come from wasn't an option. "Where did you come from?" he asked carefully. Maria's whole body tensed, and for a moment, Tommy thought she wasn't going to answer. "California," she said finally. "Los Angeles area. We left about a week ago." "That's a long drive with 2 little ones." "Yes, it is." Maria's tone suggested that this particular line of questioning was closed, and Tommy decided not to push. Whatever had driven her to leave California was her business, and she'd tell him if and when she was ready. The sound of children's laughter drifted from Sophie's bedroom, and Maria smiled for the first time that morning. "Your daughter is incredible," she said. "Carlos hasn't spoken to anyone but me in months, but he's been chattering away with her since he woke up. And Elena. She's usually so clingy, but she followed Sophie around like they were old friends." "Sophie has that effect on people," Tommy replied, pride evident in his voice. "She's never met a stranger, just friends she hasn't been introduced to yet. Her teacher says she's the unofficial social director of her class. It must be nice being that confident in the world," Maria said wistfully. "I don't think I was ever that trusting, even as a kid." Before Tommy could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the diner's number, and he answered with a slightly sinking feeling. Rosie never called on his day off unless there was a problem. "Tommy, thank God." Rosie's voice was frantic. "Linda called in sick and Miguel's stuck somewhere in Ohio because of the storm. Can you come in for the lunch shift? I know it's your day off, but I'm drowning here." Tommy glanced at Maria, who was pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. "I don't know, Rosie. I've got some company today, and—" "I'll pay you double time," Rosie interrupted. "Please, Tommy, I'll owe you huge." Double time would go a long way toward helping with Sophie's school expenses, and Rosie had been good to him since he'd started working at the diner. "Okay," he said finally, "but I can't stay past 6. I've got obligations at home." After he hung up, Maria was looking at him with an expression of barely concealed panic. "You have to go to work," she said. "I'm sorry, we'll get out of your way. Maybe the pharmacy will be able to help us figure something out." "Whoa, slow down, Tommy." Sighed, "Nobody's kicking you out. You're welcome to stay here while I'm at work. Sophie will be thrilled to have the company, and honestly, it would be a huge help to me not to have to find a babysitter on short notice." Maria shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. What if something happens? What if the kids get sick? Or I have a reaction to my blood sugar? You don't know us well enough to trust us in your home alone." Tommy looked at her steadily. "Maria, I've been a single parent for 2 years. I know the signs of someone who genuinely cares about kids, and I know the difference between people who mean harm and people who are just scared. You're scared, not dangerous. Besides, Sophie would never forgive me if I sent Carlos and Elena away before she finished teaching them how to identify sedimentary rocks." From the bedroom came the sound of Sophie's voice, explaining the difference between granite and quartz with the authority of someone who had watched every geology documentary ever made. Carlos and Elena were asking questions in a mixture of English and Spanish, their voices bright with curiosity and completely lacking the fearful edge they'd had the night before. "See," Tommy said. "They're fine. You're all fine. And when I get home tonight, we'll figure out the next steps. The pharmacy situation, the car, all of it. But right now, the most important thing is that you're safe and the kids are happy." Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Tommy could see her struggling with the concept of accepting help without being able to offer anything in return. It was a feeling he understood intimately, the pride that made it easier to suffer alone than to admit you needed something you couldn't provide for yourself. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm making dinner." "It's the least I can do," Tommy grinned. "Deal. Just don't use anything from the top shelf of the pantry. That's Sophie's emergency Halloween candy stash, and she counts every piece." As he got ready for work, Tommy found himself thinking about the strange way life seemed to unfold sometimes. Yesterday morning, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford to take Sophie to the movies over the weekend. Now he had 3 house guests, one of whom was dealing with a potentially serious medical situation. And somehow, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt useful. There was something deeply satisfying about being needed, about having the ability to make a difference in someone else's story. When he left for the diner, Sophie was teaching the twins how to make friendship bracelets, their small heads bent together over a tangle of colorful string. Maria was sitting nearby, occasionally offering guidance in Spanish and looking more relaxed than she had since she'd walked through the diner door. For just a moment, watching them from the doorway, Tommy could almost imagine that this was how his living room was supposed to look, full of children's voices and the comfortable chaos of family life. The thought surprised him with its intensity. He'd been content with his quiet life with Sophie, grateful for their small routines and peaceful evenings. But seeing his apartment come alive with the presence of other people, watching Sophie bloom, with the attention of the twins and Maria's gentle praise, he realized that maybe contentment wasn't the same thing as happiness. Maybe there was room in their life for something more, something bigger than just getting by. As he drove through the storm-cleared streets of Millbrook toward another shift at the diner, Tommy found himself hoping that whatever had brought Maria and the twins into his life would let them stay long enough for him to figure out what that something more might look like. The lunch rush at Rosie's diner hit like a freight train carrying half the population of Millbrook, all of whom seemed to have developed an urgent need for meatloaf and mashed potatoes simultaneously. Tommy moved through the familiar choreography of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and delivering plates with the efficiency that came from months of practice. But his mind kept drifting back to his apartment, where 4 people were probably sitting around his coffee table, sharing stories and sorting puzzle pieces. He'd called twice during his break, ostensibly to check if they needed anything from the store, but really just to hear the sound of children's laughter in the background and Maria's patient voice, explaining something in both English and Spanish. Each time Sophie had answered the phone with breathless updates about their activities. They'd finished the dinosaur puzzle and started a new one featuring the solar system. Maria had shown them how to make paper airplanes that could actually fly across the room. Carlos had said his first complete sentence in English, asking if they could please have peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. "You're distracted today," observed Betty, the afternoon waitress who'd been working at Rosie's since before Tommy was born. She had steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and the uncanny ability to read people's thoughts just by watching them pour coffee. "Got something on your mind besides hash browns and pie orders?" Tommy wiped down the counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, a sure sign that his nervous energy needed somewhere to go. "Just thinking about some house guests," he admitted. "Making sure they're settling in okay." Betty raised an eyebrow. "House guests? You mean those folks you brought home last night? The young woman with the twins?" Tommy shouldn't have been surprised that Betty already knew about Maria and the children. In a town the size of Millbrook, news traveled faster than lightning and with roughly the same voltage. "They needed somewhere to stay during the storm," he said simply. "Their car broke down." Betty's tone suggested she was filing away information for future reference. "And how long they planning to stay?" "I don't know," Tommy replied. "Honestly, depends on what the mechanic says about their car, I guess." What he didn't mention was the growing certainty that Maria's car troubles were the least of her problems. The way she'd tensed when he'd asked about California, the practiced efficiency with which she'd kept the twins close to her side, the fact that she'd been traveling cross-country with 2 toddlers and minimal belongings. It all painted a picture of someone running from something significant. Tommy had been around enough people in difficult situations to recognize the signs of someone whose problems couldn't be fixed with a simple transmission repair. The afternoon dragged on with its usual parade of regulars and travelers, but Tommy found himself watching the clock more than usual. At 5:45, He was already untying his apron when Rosie emerged from the kitchen with flour in her hair and a grateful expression. "I owe you big time for today," she said, pressing an envelope into his hands. "Double time plus tips, just like I promised." "You're a lifesaver, Tommy." Tommy pocketed the money without counting it, but he could feel that it was more than he'd expected. Rosie had always been generous with her employees, understanding that most of them were working at the diner because they needed every dollar they could get. "No problem. Just try not to make it a habit, okay? Sophie gets cranky when I miss dinner too many nights in a row." The drive home took him through the center of town, past the pharmacy that would hopefully have been able to help Maria with her insulin situation. The closed sign was already in the window, but Tommy made a mental note to call first thing in the morning if she was still having problems. Dr. Martinez at the community health clinic might be able to help too, though getting an appointment usually required more patience than most emergency situations allowed. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Tommy could hear voices through the door, but they were quieter now, more subdued than the excited chatter he'd heard over the phone earlier. He knocked gently before using his key, a courtesy he'd developed since becoming responsible for Sophie's sense of security and privacy. "Daddy!" Sophie's voice called out as soon as the door opened. "We made dinner and it smells like heaven." The apartment was filled with the aroma of something rich and savory, underscored by the warm scent of fresh bread. Tommy stepped inside to find the coffee table set with his mismatched plates and the kitchen clean enough to pass military inspection. Maria stood at the stove stirring something in his largest pot, while the 3 children sat cross-legged en contour, the floor playing what appeared to be a highly competitive game involving crayons and index cards. "You didn't have to do all this," Tommy said, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. "I was planning to pick up pizza on the way home." Maria turned from the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand and a genuine smile on her face. "I wanted Tio," she said. "Besides, I found some interesting ingredients in your pantry." "When was the last time you actually cooked a real meal?" Tommy considered this question seriously. "Define real meal," he said finally. "Because I make a mean bowl of cereal, and my grilled cheese sandwiches are legendary in certain circles." "I rest my case," Maria laughed, and the sound was so different from her exhausted whisper of the night before that Tommy felt something warm settle in his chest. "Dinner's ready if you want to wash up." The meal turned out to be some kind of chicken and rice dish that tasted like it had been simmering for hours rather than thrown together from whatever random ingredients Tommy had accumulated over the past few months. The twins ate with the focused attention of children who had learned not to waste food, while Sophie provided running commentary on everything from the weather to her theory about why dinosaurs were probably more colorful than scientists imagined them to be. "Maria showed us how to make tortillas from scratch," Sophie announced between bites. "Did you know you can make bread with just flour and water and salt? It's like magic, but for food." "The real magic," Maria said, "is having people to share it with. Food always tastes better when you're not eating alone." Tommy caught something in her tone, a wistfulness that suggested she'd eaten too many meals by herself recently. "How did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "This is restaurant quality stuff." "My grandmother," Maria replied, her voice softening. "She raised me after my parents died, and she believed that knowing how to feed people was one of the most important skills you could have. She said that sharing a meal was how you told someone they mattered to you." "Smart woman," Tommy said. "What happened to her?" Maria's expression shifted slightly, became more guarded. "She passed away 2 years ago, cancer." "That's when I moved to California with the twins." Tommy noticed that she didn't mention the twins' father, and something in her tone suggested that subject was off limits. Instead, he focused on what she had shared. "I'm sorry about your grandmother. She sounds like she was special." "She was," Maria agreed. "She would have loved this, having a kitchen full of people and children laughing around the table. She always said that a house wasn't really a home until it had the sound of children in it. After dinner, the twins helped clear the table with the serious concentration of people performing an important task. Carlos carefully carried each plate to the counter while Elena collected the silverware, both of them moving with the practiced efficiency that suggested they'd been helping with household tasks for longer than most children their age. Sophie supervised the entire operation, offering encouragement and gentle corrections when necessary. "We should give them baths," Maria said, watching her children interact with Sophie. "They haven't had a proper wash since we left the last motel, and Elena's hair is starting to tangle." "There are clean towels in the bathroom closet," Tommy offered. "And Sophie's got about 15 different kinds of kid shampoo if you want to use any of that. She's very particular about hair care products." While Maria supervised bath time, Tommy found himself alone in his living room for the first time in 24 hours. The space felt different somehow, more alive, as if the presence of other people had awakened something that had been sleeping in the furniture and walls. He could hear water running and children's voices echoing off bathroom tiles, punctuated by Sophie's detailed explanations of proper hair washing techniques and Maria's patient responses to questions about everything from bubbles to bathtub toys. Tommy settled into his armchair with a cup of coffee and tried to process the strange turns his life had taken in less than a day. Yesterday morning, his biggest concern had been stretching his paycheck to cover Sophie's school supplies and maybe saving up enough for a trip to the zoo before winter set in. Now he had 3 people depending on him for shelter and safety, one of whom was dealing with a serious medical condition that could become life-threatening without proper management. The rational part of his mind, the part that had learned to be cautious and practical through necessity, whispered that he was getting in over his head. He didn't know anything about Maria's background, or what had driven her to leave California with 2 toddlers and minimal resources. He didn't know how to help with diabetes management, or what kind of legal complications might arise from harboring someone who was clearly running from something. He had his own responsibilities, his own struggles, and Sophie's well-being to consider above everything else. But a larger part of him, the part that had been shaped by his own experiences of being lost and desperate and grateful for unexpected kindness, couldn't imagine turning them away. There was something about Maria that reminded him of himself. During those first terrible months after Carmen had left, when he'd been stumbling through single parenthood with no idea what he was doing and no one to ask for advice. The fear in her eyes when she'd mentioned needing insulin, the careful way she kept track of her children at all times, the gratitude that seemed to surprise her each time someone offered help. It all felt familiar in a way that made his chest ache. "Daddy, can Carlos and Elena sleep in my room tonight?" Sophie appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite pajamas and a hopeful expression. "I promise we'll be quiet," and Elena said she might be scared sleeping somewhere new. Tommy looked past her to where Maria was emerging from the bathroom with both twins wrapped in towels, their hair damp and their faces pink from warm water and soap. Carlos was clutching his stuffed elephant, a worn gray toy that looked like it had been loved for years, while Elena held tight to a small blanket that had seen better days. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart," Tommy said. "But that's really up to Maria. It's her decision where the twins sleep." Maria looked between Sophie and Tommy, her expression uncertain. "Are you sure that's okay? 3 children in one room might be loud, and you have to work tomorrow." "The kids will be fine," Tommy assured her. "Sophie's room has bunk beds, and she's been wanting someone to use the top bunk since we moved in. Besides, I sleep like a rock. Construction crews could build a highway outside my window and I wouldn't wake up." 20 minutes later, Tommy found himself standing in Sophie's doorway watching his daughter read a bedtime story to 2 children she'd known for exactly 24 hours. All 3 kids were arranged on the bottom bunk, with Carlos and Elena flanking Sophie like bookends while she held the picture book at an angle that allowed everyone to see the illustrations. And the little bear realized that home wasn't a place you could find on a map, Sophie read in her most dramatic storytelling voice. It was the feeling you got when you were surrounded by people who loved you just the way you were. Tommy felt something catch in his throat at the coincidence of the story Sophie had chosen. A book about a young bear who gets separated from his family and has to learn what home really means. He wondered if Sophie had selected it intentionally, with the intuitive understanding children sometimes displayed about exactly what other people needed to hear. After the story ended and the twins were settled into the top bunk with whispered promises that Sophie would be right below them if they needed anything, Tommy joined Maria in the living room where she was sitting on the couch with her black medical bag open in her lap. She was checking her blood glucose meter, a small digital device that looked more complicated than it probably was. "How are your levels?" Tommy asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Better than I expected," Maria admitted, showing him the reading on the tiny screen. "I was able to get insulin from the pharmacy this afternoon. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying both relief and resignation. "That's good news," Tommy said. "I was worried about you." Maria looked up from her medical supplies with an expression of surprise. "You were worried about me? You barely know me." "I know enough," Tommy replied. "I know you're a good mother who's doing everything she can to take care of her children. I know you're dealing with something scary and you're handling it with more grace than most people would. And I know that Sophie has talked about Carlos and Elena approximately every 5 minutes since I got home from work." Maria smiled at this. "She's incredible with them. I've never seen Carlos warm up to anyone so quickly. He's usually very shy around strangers. Sophie has that effect on people," Tommy said. "She sees the best in everyone, and somehow that makes people want to be their best selves around her." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of children settling down for sleep and the familiar creaks and sighs of the old house around them. Outside, the evening was clear and still, a stark contrast to the storm that had brought them all together the night before. "Tommy," Maria said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why aren't you asking me more questions? About where I came from, what I'm running from, why I'm traveling across the country with 2 babies and no real plan." Maria's tone was genuinely curious rather than defensive. Most people would want to know. Tommy considered this for a moment. "I figure you'll tell me what you think I need to know when you're ready to tell me. People have reasons for keeping things private, and those reasons are usually good ones. But aren't you worried about letting strangers into your home, around your daughter? Are you planning to hurt us?" Tommy asked directly. "Of course not." "Then you're not strangers anymore," Tommy said simply. "You're people who needed help, and now you're people Sophie cares about. That's all I need to know right now." Maria stared at him for a long moment, and Tommy could see her struggling with some internal debate. "You're not like most people," she said finally. "Neither are you," Tommy replied. "Most people wouldn't have been so careful to thank me for something as basic as offering shelter during a storm. Most people wouldn't have insisted on cooking dinner or cleaning my kitchen. You've been taking care of other people for so long that accepting help feels uncomfortable, doesn't it?" Maria's laugh was rueful. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who recognizes the feeling," Tommy said. "I spent the first year after Sophie's mother left trying to prove to everyone, including myself, that I could handle everything alone. Took me a while to figure out that accepting help wasn't the same thing as admitting failure. What changed your mind?" Tommy thought about Mrs. Patterson's casseroles and the way the teachers at Sophie's school had quietly made sure she had everything she needed for class projects, even when money was tight. I realized that the people who wanted to help weren't judging me for needing it. They were just glad to have something useful to offer. And I started thinking about how good it felt when I could help someone else, how it made me feel like I was part of something bigger than just my own problems. Maria nodded slowly. My grandmother used to say something similar. She said that independence was important, but isolation was dangerous. That the strongest people were the ones who knew how to lean on others when they needed to. Smart woman, Tommy said. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, Maria said with certainty. She always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they treated children and strangers. She would have approved of what you did for us. Before Tommy could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Both adults froze, and Tommy saw Maria's entire body tense with the kind of alertness that suggested she'd been expecting unwelcome visitors. He held up a hand, indicating that she should stay seated, and moved quietly to the window to peer through the blinds. Mrs. Patterson stood on the landing outside his door, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the concerned expression she usually reserved for emergencies or gossip of unusual importance. Tommy relaxed and opened the door, grateful that it was his elderly neighbor rather than whoever Maria had been afraid it might be. Tommy, dear, Mrs. Patterson said without preamble, I heard you had some unexpected guests, and I thought you might need a little extra food. Growing children eat more than you'd expect, and I know your budget doesn't always stretch as far as your heart does. Tommy accepted the casserole dish with genuine gratitude. Mrs. Patterson's cooking had gotten him through some difficult weeks when he'd first moved to Millbrook, and he knew that her offer of food was really an offer of support disguised as practicality. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That's incredibly thoughtful. Mrs. Patterson peered past him into the apartment, her sharp eyes taking in Maria sitting on the couch and the evidence of children throughout the living room. The young lady and her twins? She asked quietly. Maria, Carlos, and Elena. Tommy confirmed. Their car broke down during the storm. I see. Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she saw quite a bit more than Tommy had explicitly shared, but she was too polite to ask direct questions. Well, you know where I am if you need anything. Extra blankets, children's clothes, whatever might be helpful. After Mrs. Patterson left, Tommy returned to the living room to find Maria staring at the closed door with an expression of amazement. She just brought you food because she heard you had guests? Mrs. Patterson takes care of everyone in the building, Tommy explained. When Sophie and I first moved in, she brought us dinner every night for a week until I got my first paycheck. She said she remembered what it was like to be young and overwhelmed. And she didn't ask any questions about who we were or why we were here. This is Millbrook, Tommy said. People here figure that if you're in Tommy Rodriguez's apartment, you're probably okay. I've got a reputation for not bringing home axe murderers. Maria laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. I'd forgotten what it was like to live somewhere where people looked out for each other. In Los Angeles, you could live next to someone for years and never know their name. Is that where you were? Los Angeles? Maria nodded. For 2 years. After my grandmother died, I thought a big city would have more opportunities, more ways to make a living with twins. But it's expensive there, and childcare costs more than most people make in a month. I was working 3 different part-time jobs and still barely making rent. That sounds exhausting, Tommy said. What kind of work were you doing? Cleaning offices at night, working at a daycare during the day, and babysitting on weekends. Maria replied. The daycare job was good. I could bring Carlos and Elena with me, and they got to play with other children. But the pay was terrible, and there were no benefits. Tommy could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the bone-deep weariness that came from working constantly without ever getting ahead. What made you decide to leave? Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Tommy could see her weighing how much to reveal. There was a man, she said finally. Someone I met at the daycare. He seemed nice at first, interested in the twins, always bringing them little gifts. But then he started asking too many questions about their father, about my family, about money. Tommy felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of questions? He wanted to know about their medical history, whether they'd ever been sick, if they'd had any unusual health problems. At first I thought he was just being caring, you know. Some people are really interested in children's development. But then he started asking about their birth certificates, about whether I had any family with money. That's not normal interest. Tommy said quietly, "No, it's not," Maria agreed. And when I started avoiding him, he began showing up at my apartment. Just standing outside watching. He never did anything threatening, but it felt wrong, like he was waiting for something. Tommy processed this information, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "Is that why you left Los Angeles?" Maria nodded. "I packed everything we could fit in the car and left in the middle of the night. I'd been planning to move anyway. I'd found the nanny job in Denver through an online agency, but the timing wasn't supposed to be so sudden." "Have you heard from him since you left?" "No, but—" Maria hesitated, then continued. "I keep feeling like we're being followed. It's probably just paranoia, but I swear I've seen the same car behind us several times since we left California. A dark sedan with tinted windows." Tommy felt his protective instincts kick into high gear. "Maria, if someone is following you, that's not paranoia. That's a serious safety concern. Have you thought about calling the police?" Maria shook her head. "And tell them what?" "That a man I met at a daycare asked too many questions about my children, and I think I might have seen the same car more than once on a cross-country drive. They'd think I was crazy." "Maybe, but besides," Maria interrupted, "there's something else. Something I haven't told you." Tommy waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal was the real reason she'd been so reluctant to share. Details about her situation. "The twins' father," Maria said quietly. "I lied when I said he wasn't in the picture. He is, but not in the way you'd think." "What do you mean?" Maria took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "He's dead. He died when the twins were 6 months old. But before he died, he left them something valuable." Tommy leaned forward, his full attention focused on Maria's words. "He worked for a pharmaceutical company," Maria continued. "Big corporation, lots of money, lots of secrets. He was a researcher working on some kind of breakthrough medication. Before he died, he told me that if anything happened to him, I should make sure Carlos and Elena were taken care of. He said they were entitled to something, but he never told me what." "What happened to him?" Tommy asked. "Car accident," Maria said, but her tone suggested she had doubts about the official explanation. "Single car crash on a mountain road. No witnesses, no other vehicles involved. But David was a careful driver, Tommy. He'd never been in an accident before, never even had a speeding ticket." "You think someone killed him?" "I don't know," Maria admitted. "But I think the man in Los Angeles knew something about David's work, about what he left behind. And I think that's why he was so interested in the twins." Tommy sat back in his chair, his mind reeling with the implications of what Maria had just revealed. "What exactly did David leave them?" "I'm not sure," Maria said. "Some kind of trust fund, maybe, or shares in the company. He said there were documents, but I've never been able to find them. After he died, his company said they didn't have any record of special provisions for the twins, but David insisted they were entitled to something significant." "What was the name of the company?" Maria hesitated for a moment, then said, "Meridian Pharmaceuticals." Tommy felt recognition spark in his memory. Meridian Pharmaceuticals was one of the largest drug companies in the world, with annual revenues in the billions and a reputation for aggressive business practices. If David had been working on something valuable for them, and if the twins were somehow entitled to a share of that value, it would explain a lot about why someone might be interested in tracking them down. "Maria," Tommy said carefully, if This is true. If the twins are entitled to something from a company like Meridian, we're talking about potentially enormous amounts of money. I know, Maria whispered. That's what scares me. David always said that the bigger the money, the more dangerous it became for the people who were supposed to inherit it. Before Tommy could respond, there was a soft sound from Sophie's bedroom, followed by Elena's voice calling out in Spanish. Maria immediately stood up, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. She probably just needs the bathroom, Maria said, but Tommy could see the tension in her shoulders. I'll be right back. As Maria disappeared down the hallway, Tommy remained in his chair, staring at the closed front door and thinking about dark sedans and pharmaceutical companies and the strange ways that ordinary evenings could suddenly become something much more complicated. Whatever Maria and the twins were running from, it was bigger than car trouble and bad luck. And now, by offering them shelter, he'd become part of their story whether he'd intended to or not. The question was whether he was prepared for whatever that story might bring to his door. The morning brought an unseasonable chill that made Tommy grateful for the extra warmth in his apartment, though he wasn't sure if it came from the additional bodies or the sense of purpose that had settled over their small household. He woke to the sound of hushed voices and careful footsteps, the kind of sounds that suggested people were trying very hard not to wake anyone else. When he emerged from his bedroom, he found Maria sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers spread out in front of her, her expression grim in the early light filtering through the windows. The twins were still asleep in Sophie's room, and Sophie herself was curled up on the living room couch under her favorite blanket, having apparently decided sometime during the night that her guests might need someone nearby. Tommy paused in the doorway, struck by the sight of his daughter's small form and the unconscious protectiveness in the way she'd positioned herself between the bedroom door and the rest of the apartment. Couldn't sleep? Tommy asked quietly, moving toward the coffee maker. Maria looked up from her papers, and Tommy could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, despite the careful way she'd arranged her features into a neutral expression. Elena had another nightmare around 3, she said. After I got her settled, I couldn't turn my brain off again. Tommy poured himself coffee and gestured toward the empty chair across from her. Mind if I join you? Maria nodded toward the papers in front of her. I've been going through everything I have from David's time at Meridian. I thought maybe there was something I missed, some clue about what he wanted me to find. Tommy settled into the chair and took a closer look at the documents. There were employment records, pay stubs, what looked like research notes written in dense technical language, and several official-looking letters with the Meridian Pharmaceuticals letterhead. Find anything useful? Maybe, Maria said, pulling one sheet toward him. Look at this. It's a memo David sent to his supervisor about 3 weeks before he died. Tommy read the document carefully. The language was formal and corporate, but the underlying message was clear enough. David had expressed concerns about the safety protocols for a new diabetes medication that Meridian was preparing to bring to market. He'd requested additional testing and had suggested that the current data was insufficient to ensure patient safety. The response from his supervisor, attached to the original memo, was a polite but firm dismissal of his concerns and a reminder that product launch schedules were not subject to individual researcher preferences. He was trying to stop them from releasing something dangerous? Tommy asked. It looks that way, Maria replied. But there's more. She shuffled through the papers and pulled out what appeared to be a research summary. This is what he was working on. A new insulin formulation that was supposed to be more effective than anything currently available. According to his notes, it worked perfectly in initial trials, but there were problems when they scaled up for larger studies. Tommy scanned the research summary, trying to make sense of the scientific terminology. What kind of problems? Severe allergic reactions in a small percentage of patients. David documented 12 cases where people had life-threatening responses to the medication. But when he reported it to the company, They told him the sample size was too small to be statistically significant. But 12 people having life-threatening reactions isn't insignificant, Tommy said. Exactly, Maria agreed. David kept pushing for more testing, more safety studies, and then he died. Tommy set down the papers and looked at Maria directly. You think Meridian killed him to keep him quiet? I don't know, Maria said, but her tone suggested she had strong suspicions. What I do know is that 6 months after David died, Meridian released the insulin formulation he'd been concerned about. It's called Medimax, and it's made them billions of dollars. Tommy felt something cold settle in his stomach. And the allergic reactions? They still happen, Maria said quietly. I've been following the news reports. There have been lawsuits, congressional hearings, families who've lost people to unexpected reactions. But Meridian has teams of lawyers and enough money to make most problems disappear. Maria, Tommy said carefully, if David left documentation of safety problems that Meridian ignored, that could be worth more than money. That could bring down the entire company, Maria nodded. I think that's what the man in Los Angeles was really looking for. Not just money, but evidence. And I think that's why David set up whatever he set up for the twins. Not just to take care of them financially, but to make sure someone would eventually find the truth. Before Tommy could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Both adults froze, and Tommy saw Maria's hand instinctively move toward the black bag that never seemed to be far from her side. He held up a finger, indicating that she should wait, and moved quietly to the window to check who was outside. A well-dressed woman in her 40s stood on the landing, holding a briefcase and wearing the kind of expensive coat that suggested she wasn't from Millbrook. Her hair was pulled back in a professional style, and she had the confident posture of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Tommy didn't recognize her, but something about her presence made his protective instincts spike. Can I help you? Tommy asked through the door, not opening it. Mr. Rodriguez? The woman's voice was cultured, professional. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm from the Meridian Pharmaceuticals Family Services Department. I'm looking for Maria Vasquez and her children. Tommy felt Maria's sharp intake of breath behind him and turned to see that all the color had drained from her face. She shook her head frantically, but Tommy was already processing the implications of Dr. Chin's presence. Somehow Meridian had tracked them to Millbrook, to his apartment specifically. That level of resources and determination suggested that whatever David had left for the twins was even more significant than Maria had realized. I'm sorry, Tommy called through the door. I don't know anyone by that name. Mr. Rodriguez, Dr. Chun said, and her tone became slightly less friendly. I understand you're trying to be helpful, but Maria and her children are in potential danger. We have reason to believe that someone has been following them, someone with malicious intent. We'd like to offer them protection. Tommy looked at Maria, who was shaking her head even more vigorously. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was clutching the research papers to her chest like a shield. Protection from what? Tommy asked. There are people who believe that Maria has access to certain proprietary information that belonged to her late partner, David Reeves, Dr. Chun explained. Information that could be valuable to competitors or criminal organizations. Meridian Pharmaceuticals takes the safety of employees' families very seriously, even after the employee has passed away. Tommy felt anger building in his chest at the smooth way Dr. Chun delivered what was essentially a threat disguised as an offer of help. And if she doesn't want your protection? Then she's free to decline, of course, Dr. Chun said. But I hope she consider the welfare of her children. 3-year-olds are very vulnerable when they're caught in the middle of corporate espionage situations. The casual mention of the twins' age, which Tommy was certain Maria hadn't shared with anyone at Meridian, confirmed that the company had been watching them for some time. The knowledge that they'd been under surveillance, possibly for months, made Tommy's blood run cold. Give me a minute, Tommy said. He turned back to Maria, who was now visibly shaking. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I can't go with her," Maria whispered. "David warned me never to trust anyone from Meridian, no matter what they promised. He said they were experts at making people disappear when it was convenient for them." "Okay," Tommy said. "Then we figure out another way." "We?" Maria looked at him with surprise. "Tommy, you don't understand what you're getting into. These people have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. If you help me, you're putting yourself and Sophie at risk." Tommy thought about Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room, about the life he'd built in Millbrook, about all the reasons he should open the door and hand Maria and the twins over to Dr. Chun. Then he thought about the research papers documenting 12 people who'd had life-threatening reactions to medication that Meridian knew was dangerous, and about David Reeves dying in a convenient car accident after raising safety concerns. "Sophie's already involved," Tommy said finally. "She cares about Carlos and Elena, which means I care about them too. And I've never been good at standing by when powerful people try to hurt vulnerable ones." Before Maria could respond, Dr. Chun's voice came through the door again. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to open this door. We have legal authority to conduct a welfare check on these children." "What kind of legal authority?" Tommy called back. "Child Protective Services has received reports that Maria Vasquez may be endangering her children by keeping them in unstable living conditions while dealing with a serious medical condition. We're here to ensure their safety." Tommy felt fury surge through him. The idea that Meridian had manipulated the child welfare system to get access to Maria and the twins was both brilliant and despicable. Even if Maria could prove that the value CPS report was fabricated, the bureaucratic process would give Meridian plenty of time to accomplish whatever they'd come to Millbrook to do. "Tommy," Maria said urgently, "there's a back way out of this building, isn't there? Through the basement?" Tommy nodded. "Mrs. Patterson showed me when I first moved in. There's a door that leads to the alley behind the building." "Get the children," Maria said, already moving towards Sophie's bedroom. "We need to leave now." "Maria, wait," Tommy said. "If we run, it's going to look like we're guilty of something. And Dr. Chun's not going anywhere. Even if we get out of the building, she'd just follow us." "Then what do you suggest?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking rapidly. "We need help. Someone with more authority than a pharmaceutical company representative. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated." "Like who?" "Like Agent Sarah Mills from the FBI," said a voice from the doorway. Both Tommy and Maria spun around to see Sophie standing in the entrance to the hallway, fully dressed and holding a business card in her small hand. Her expression was serious, more adult than any 8-year-old should have to be. "Sophie," Tommy said carefully, "what are you talking about?" "The lady who came to my school last month," Sophie explained. "She was teaching us about stranger danger and internet safety. But she also said that if we ever knew about adults doing bad things to other adults, we should tell someone we trusted, and they should call this number." Sophie handed Tommy the business card. It was official FBI identification for Special Agent Sarah Mills, with a phone number and an email address. Tommy remembered now. The school had sent home a notice about a federal agent visiting to talk to students about safety, though he hadn't paid much attention at the time. "You think we should call the FBI?" Tommy asked. The lady on the other side of the door sounds like she's trying to take Carlos and Elena away from their mama, Sophie said with the kind of moral clarity that children possessed. "That seems like a bad thing that adults are doing to other adults." Tommy looked at Maria, who was staring at Sophie with something approaching awe. "She's right," Maria said quietly. "If David was really onto something, if Meridian really did release dangerous medication and cover it up, that's exactly the kind of thing the FBI would want to know about." Dr. Chun knocked on the door again, more insistently this time. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to open this door immediately. We have a legal obligation to ensure these children's welfare. Give me 1 minute, Tommy called back. He turned to Maria. It's your choice. We can try to run, or we can make this call and see what happens. Maria looked at the research papers in her hands, then at Sophie's earnest face, then at the bedroom door where the twins were presumably still sleeping. Make the call, she said. Tommy dialed the number on Agent Mills' card, expecting to get voicemail or a secretary. Instead, a crisp professional voice answered on the second ring. Agent Mills, this is Tommy Rodriguez. You visited my daughter's school in Millbrook, Michigan, last month. I think I need help with a situation involving corporate misconduct and child endangerment. Mr. Rodriguez, what kind of situation are we talking about? Tommy took a deep breath. I have a woman and her twin children staying with me. The woman has evidence that Meridian Pharmaceuticals knowingly released dangerous medication after one of their researchers documented safety problems. That researcher died in what was officially ruled an accident. Now representatives from Meridian are at my door claiming they have legal authority to take the children. There was a brief pause. Mr. Rodriguez, are you in immediate danger? I don't know, Tommy said honestly. But the woman from Meridian is demanding that I open my door, and the mother of these children is terrified of what will happen if I do. Do not open that door, Agent Mills said firmly. I'm 40 minutes away from Millbrook. Can you maintain your current position until I arrive? I think so. Good. Mr. Rodriguez, I need you to understand that making false reports to federal agents is a serious crime. Are you certain about the claims you're making regarding Meridian Pharmaceuticals? Tommy looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. Agent Mills, I have documentation in front of me that shows a Meridian researcher reported 12 cases of life-threatening allergic reactions to a new insulin formulation, and that the company ignored his recommendations for additional safety testing. The medication was released anyway and has since been linked to multiple deaths. That's a very serious allegation, Agent Mills said. I'll need to see that documentation. You'll have it, Tommy promised. Stay where you are. Keep that door locked and don't let anyone inside until I arrive. If the Meridian representative becomes aggressive or tries to force entry, call 911 immediately. After Tommy hung up, he found Maria and Sophie staring at him with identical expressions of nervous hope. From the bedroom came the sound of the twins waking up, their soft voices mixing Spanish and English, as they tried to figure out where they were. What happens now? Maria asked. Now we wait, Tommy said. And we hope that Agent Mills is as good at her job as she sounded on the phone. Dr. Chun knocked again, and this time her voice carried a sharp edge of impatience. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to have to insist that you open this door. The children's welfare is our primary concern. Dr. Chun, Tommy called back. I've contacted the FBI. Agent Mills is on her way to review the situation. I'm sure you'll want to speak with her about your concerns regarding the children's welfare. The silence that followed was telling. Tommy could imagine Dr. Chun weighing her options, trying to decide whether Meridian's interest in the twins was worth the scrutiny of a federal investigation. After a long moment, she spoke again, and her tone was noticeably different. Mr. Rodriguez, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. Meridian Pharmaceuticals is simply trying to fulfill our obligations to the families of former employees. If you'd prefer to handle this matter through official channels, that's certainly your prerogative. I appreciate your understanding, Tommy replied, though he doubted that Dr. Chun's retreat was anything more than a tactical withdrawal. Maria was helping the twins get dressed in Sophie's bedroom, explaining in gentle tones that they were going to meet a nice police lady who wanted to make sure everyone was safe. Carlos and Alina seemed to accept this explanation with the resilience that children displayed when adults managed to project calm confidence. though Tommy noticed that they stayed close to their mother and spoke in whispers. "Are we in trouble?" Sophie asked Tommy quietly. "No, sweetheart," Tommy assured her. "We're helping someone who needed help, and now we're making sure that help is the right kind." "Is the lady outside one of the bad adults?" Tommy considered this question carefully. "I think she works for people who have forgotten that making money isn't as important as keeping people safe." Sophie nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. "Mrs. Patterson says that when people forget what's really important, sometimes they need other people to remind them." "Mrs. Patterson is a smart lady," Tommy agreed. The 35 minutes until Agent Mills arrived felt simultaneously endless and far too short. Dr. Chun didn't knock again, but Tommy could see her shadow moving past the window occasionally, suggesting that she was waiting in the hallway or perhaps coordinating with someone else. Maria spent the time organizing David's research papers and preparing what she called her evidence package, while the 3 children sat quietly on the living room floor working on a puzzle that featured farm animals. When Agent Mills finally knocked, her identification was clearly visible through the peephole, and her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with situations where people's lives hung in the balance. Tommy opened the door to find a woman in her late 30s with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that immediately took in every detail of the apartment and its occupants. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand. "Agent Mills, thank you for calling." Dr. Chun appeared in the hallway behind Agent Mills, and Tommy could see her calculating whether to introduce herself or disappear entirely. Agent Mills solved her dilemma by turning around and acknowledging her presence. "Dr. Chun, I presume?" Agent Mills said. "I understand you're here on behalf of Meridian Pharmaceuticals." "That's correct," Dr. Chun replied, and Tommy had to admire her recovery. "Time. We're concerned about the welfare of 2 children whose father was a former Meridian employee." "I see," Agent Mills said neutrally. "And this concern has brought you to Mr. Rodriguez's apartment because the children's mother has been traveling under difficult circumstances, and we wanted to offer assistance," Dr. Chun explained. "How?" "Thoughtful," Agent Mills replied, and something in her tone suggested that she wasn't particularly impressed by Meridian's concern. "Mr. Rodriguez, may I come in?" Tommy stepped aside and allowed Agent Mills to enter the apartment. She immediately spotted Maria, who was standing near the kitchen table with the research papers arranged in front of her like evidence at a trial. "Ms. Vasquez?" Agent Mills said. "I'm Agent Mills. Mr. Rodriguez tells me you have information about safety issues with Meridian Pharmaceuticals products." "I do," Maria said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "My partner, David Reeves, was a researcher for Meridian. Before he died, he documented serious problems with a new insulin formulation that the company released anyway." Agent Mills moved to the table and began examining the papers while Dr. Chun hovered in the doorway, clearly torn between wanting to observe the proceedings and wanting to distance herself from whatever Maria might reveal. "These are David Reeves' original research notes?" Agent Mills asked. "Yes," Maria confirmed. "He documented 12 cases of severe allergic reactions during clinical trials. When he recommended additional safety testing, his supervisors overruled him and moved forward with the product launch." Agent Mills studied the documentation carefully, her expression becoming increasingly serious as she read. "Ms. Vasquez, are you aware that Medimax insulin has been linked to 17 deaths in the past 2 years?" "I suspected," Maria said quietly. "I've been following the news reports." "Dr. Chun," Agent Mills said without looking up from the papers, "would you care to comment on these allegations?" Dr. Chun stepped into the apartment, and Tommy could see her struggling to maintain her professional composure. "Agent Mills, I'm not qualified to discuss technical research matters. I'm here purely in a family services capacity." "I see," Agent Mills said. And in your family services capacity, what exactly were you planning to do with Ms. Vasquez and her children? Offer them support and resources, Dr. Chun said. Meridian has programs to assist the families of former employees who may be experiencing financial difficulties. How generous, Agent Mills replied dryly. She turned back to Maria. Ms. Vasquez, did you contact Meridian to request this assistance? No, Maria said firmly. I've been trying to avoid contact with Meridian since David died. And yet they managed to track you to Mr. Rodriguez's apartment in Millbrook, Michigan, Agent Mills observed. That suggests a significant investment of resources for a voluntary assistance program. Dr. Chun's professional mask slipped slightly. Agent Mills, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of our visit. I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all, Agent Mills said. She gathered up David's research papers and turned to face Dr. Chun directly. Dr. Chun, I'm going to need you to contact your supervisors at Meridian and inform them that Ms. Vasquez and her children are now under federal protection pending investigation of allegations of corporate misconduct and potential criminal negligence. Agent Mills, Dr. Chun said carefully. I'm not sure you have the authority to Dr. Chun, Agent Mills interrupted. I have the authority to investigate potential violations of federal drug safety regulations, fraud, and obstruction of justice. If Meridian Pharmaceuticals has been suppressing safety data related to products that have caused multiple deaths, that falls squarely within my jurisdiction. Tommy watched Dr. Chun's face cycle through several emotions before settling on carefully. Controlled resignation. I'll need to make some phone calls, she said finally. You do that, Agent Mills agreed. In the meantime, Ms. Vasquez and her children will remain here with Mr. Rodriguez until we can arrange more permanent protection. After Dr. Chun left, the apartment felt simultaneously safer and more charged with potential energy. Agent Mills spent another hour going through David's research documentation, asking Maria detailed questions about the timeline of events leading up to his death and the circumstances of her departure from Los Angeles. Ms. Vasquez, Agent Mills said finally, I need you to understand that if we move forward with this investigation, you and your children will be in the middle of a legal battle that could last years. Meridian Pharmaceuticals has resources and influence that most people can't imagine. Are you prepared for that? Maria looked at her twins, who were playing quietly with Sophie while Tommy prepared lunch in the kitchen. Agent Mills, if David's research can prevent other families from losing people they love, then yes, I'm prepared for whatever comes next. Agent Mills nodded approvingly. Good, because based on what I've seen today, I think David Reeves was onto something much bigger than safety problems with one medication. I think he discovered a pattern of corporate misconduct that goes to the very heart of how Meridian operates. What happens now? Tommy asked. Now we build a case, Agent Mills said. And we make sure that David Reeves didn't die for nothing. As Agent Mills gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Tommy found himself standing at the center of a situation that had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined when he'd offered shelter to a stranded mother and her children. But looking at Maria's determined expression and the way Sophie was teaching Carlos and Elena to properly arrange toy dinosaurs by geological period, he realized that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost. Sometimes, the most important battles were the ones you never expected to find yourself in. And sometimes the most ordinary people became heroes simply by refusing to look the other way when powerful people did terrible things. 3 weeks into what Agent Mills had termed protective monitoring, Tommy's apartment had transformed into something resembling a command center disguised as a family home. Federal agents rotated through 12-hour shifts, maintaining discreet surveillance from unmarked vehicles while Maria worked with prosecutors to build an airtight case against Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The twins had adapted to their new routine with the remarkable resilience of children, treating the plainclothes agents like interesting new neighbors who happened to carry badges and speak into tiny radios. Tommy found himself navigating a strange, new normal that included encrypted phone calls, legal briefings conducted at his kitchen table, and the constant awareness that powerful people somewhere were calculating how much trouble his small household represented to their billion-dollar empire. Agent Mills had been transparent about the stakes from the beginning. Meridian wasn't just fighting to suppress David's research anymore. They were fighting for their corporate survival. The evidence Maria had preserved painted a damning picture of systematic safety violations spanning nearly a decade. David's documentation of the Medimax problems had been just the tip of an iceberg that included suppressed studies, buried adverse event reports, and a pattern of intimidation directed at researchers who raised inconvenient questions. The Department of Justice had opened a criminal investigation, and congressional hearings were being scheduled. Stock prices for Meridian had dropped 30% in 2 weeks. "They're going to come at us harder now," Agent Mills warned during one of her evening briefings. She sat across from Tommy and Maria at the kitchen table while the children watched a movie in the living room, their voices a comforting backdrop to discussions of corporate retaliation and witness protection protocols. When companies this size get desperate, they stop playing by normal rules. Maria stirred her coffee thoughtfully, her glucose monitor sitting beside her cup like a small reminder of how personal this fight had become. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means they'll try everything," Agent Mills replied. "Legal challenges to your custody of the twins, attempts to discredit your credibility, private investigators digging into every aspect of your background. They'll look for anything they can use to make you seem unreliable or unstable." Tommy felt anger surge through him at the casual way Agent Mills described what amounted to a coordinated assault on Maria's character and family. "That's legal?" "The legal challenges will be conducted through proper channels," Agent Mills said carefully. "The other activities occupy a grayer area. We'll do our best to monitor and counteract their efforts, but Meridian has resources that allow them to operate in ways that are difficult to track or prove." Sophie appeared in the doorway, wearing her dinosaur pajamas and carrying her stuffed pterodactyl. "Daddy, Carlos wants to know if the bad company people are going to try to take him and Elena away." Tommy felt his heart constrict at the matter-of-fact way his 8-year-old daughter delivered this question. The children had been remarkably adaptable to their circumstances, but they weren't immune to the tension that permeated the apartment, despite everyone's efforts to maintain normal routines. "No, sweetheart," Tommy said firmly. "We won't let that happen." "That's what I told him," Sophie replied with satisfaction. "I said that you and Maria and the FBI lady were all working together to keep everyone safe." After Sophie returned to the living room, Agent Mills leaned forward across the table. "She's right, you know. We are all working together. But I need both of you to understand that this situation is about to get significantly more complicated." "How so?" Maria asked. "Judge Harrison issued a preliminary injunction this afternoon freezing Meridian's assets pending the outcome of the criminal investigation," Agent Mills explained. "That's good news for the case, but it also means that Meridian is now facing the possibility of complete corporate collapse if they can't contain this situation." Tommy processed this information, understanding that a cornered corporation with billions of dollars at stake was likely to be far more dangerous than one that still had options for damage control. "What are they likely to try?" "Everything," Agent Mills said grimly. "But first, they're going to try to separate you from Maria and the twins. Divide and conquer. Make it harder for us to provide protection and easier for them to apply pressure." "How would they do that?" Agent Mills pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "This arrived at my office an hour ago. It's a motion filed in family court requesting emergency custody evaluation for Carlos and Elena Vasquez. Maria's face went pale as she opened the folder and began reading. They're claiming I'm mentally unstable and that keeping the children in a federal investigation environment constitutes child endangerment. Who filed it? Tommy asked. Someone identifying themselves as David Reeves' sister, Agent Mills replied. Claims she's been searching for the twins since David's death and only recently learned of their existence. Maria looked up from the papers with confusion and growing alarm. David didn't have a sister. He was an only child. His parents died when he was in college, and he had no other family. We know that, Agent Mills said. But proving it in family court will take time, and in the meantime, a judge could order temporary custody pending investigation. Tommy felt cold dread settling in his stomach. When is the hearing? Tomorrow morning, Agent Mills replied. 10 o'clock at the county courthouse. That's not enough time to prepare a proper response, Maria protested. Exactly, Agent Mills agreed. That's the point. They're hoping to catch us off guard and get a favorable ruling before we can mount an effective defense. Tommy stood up abruptly and began pacing around the small kitchen, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. What happens if they get temporary custody? The children would be placed with David's alleged sister pending further investigation, Agent Mills said. Given that we know she's not actually David's sister, that would essentially mean handing Carlos and Elena over to Meridian. Maria's hands were shaking as she set down the legal papers. They can't do that. Those are my children. David isn't even their biological father. He just helped me raise them. Legally, I'm their only parent. That's our strongest argument, Agent Mills agreed. But family court judges have broad discretion in emergency situations, especially when there are allegations of endangerment. What kind of allegations? Tommy asked. Agent Mills consulted another set of documents. Failure to provide stable housing, exposing the children to potentially dangerous federal investigation activities, relying on strangers for basic care, and maintaining an unstable living situation due to your diabetes management issues. Those are lies, Tommy said flatly. Anyone who spent 5 minutes in this apartment can see that those children are well cared for and happy. We know that, Agent Mills said. But we need to prove it in court, and we need to do it tomorrow. Maria wiped tears from her eyes and took a shaky breath. What do we need to do? Agent Mills pulled out a legal pad and began writing. First, we need character witnesses. People who can testify about your fitness as a mother and the stability of the children's current living situation. Second, we need medical documentation proving that your diabetes is well managed and doesn't interfere with your parenting abilities. Third, we need to expose the fraudulent identity of the supposed sister. I can help with character witnesses, Tommy offered. Mrs. Patterson, Sophie's teacher, Dr. Martinez from the community clinic, people at the diner who've met Maria, and the twins. Good, Agent Mills said, making notes. Maria, do you have recent medical records documenting your diabetes management? Some, Maria replied. But most of my regular care was in Los Angeles, and I haven't had time to transfer records since we've been traveling. We'll work with what we have and get emergency documentation from Dr. Martinez if necessary, Agent Mills decided. The most important thing is proving that the alleged sister is a fraud. Tommy stopped pacing and turned to face both women. What if we go on the offensive instead of just defending? What do you mean? Agent Mills asked. I mean, what if we use the hearing to expose Meridian's tactics? If this woman is claiming to be David's sister and we can prove she's lying, that's evidence of fraud and conspiracy. Can't we turn their own strategy against them? Agent Mills considered this, her expression thoughtful. It's risky. If we make accusations we can't immediately prove, it could backfire and make Maria look paranoid or unstable. But if we can prove it, Maria said slowly, it demonstrates exactly how far Meridian is willing to go to silence David's research. The timing would have to be perfect, Agent Mills warned. And we'd need ironclad evidence of the connection between this fake sister and Meridian. Tommy felt an idea forming, the kind of desperate gamble that could either expose the truth or destroy any chance they had of protecting the twins. What if we give them what they want? Both women stared at him. Explain, Agent Mills said carefully. What if we let them think their plan is working? Arrange to meet with the alleged sister before the hearing. Get her to reveal information about her connection to Meridian. Maybe even record the conversation. That's extremely dangerous, Agent Mills said immediately. If Maria is alone with someone working for Meridian, anything could happen. She wouldn't be alone, Tommy said. I'd be there. And presumably you have surveillance. Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal. It could work, she said finally. If this woman really believes she's about to gain custody of the twins, she might be careless about what she reveals. Agent Mills shook her head. The risk is too high. If something goes wrong, if she has backup, or if the meeting is a trap, we could lose everything. We could lose everything anyway, Maria pointed out. If they get custody tomorrow, the children disappear into Meridian's control. At least this way, we have a chance to expose what they're doing. The debate continued for another hour, with Agent Mills raising valid concerns about safety and legal protocols while Tommy and Maria argued for taking proactive action. Finally, Agent Mills agreed to a modified version of Tommy's plan. She would arrange for the alleged sister to meet with Maria at a neutral location where federal agents could provide discreet surveillance and intervention if necessary. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that seemed designed to match Tommy's mood, as he helped Maria prepare for what could be the most important day of her life. The twins sensed the tension despite everyone's efforts to maintain normal routines, staying close to their mother and speaking in whispers that suggested they understood something significant was happening. Sophie had appointed herself as the twins' entertainment coordinator, organizing elaborate games that kept them distracted while the adults dealt with legal preparations. Tommy watched his daughter explain the rules of a complex treasure hunt involving hidden toy dinosaurs and felt his heart swell with pride at her instinctive understanding of what Carlos and Elena needed. She's going to make an excellent witness, Agent Mills observed, watching Sophie demonstrate proper treasure hunting techniques. Children that articulate and confident are very persuasive to family court judges. The meeting with David's alleged sister was scheduled for 9 o'clock at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, giving them an hour to gather whatever intelligence they could before the custody hearing began. Agent Mills had arranged for surveillance teams to monitor all entrances and exits, with backup positioned throughout the surrounding area. Maria dressed carefully for the encounter, choosing clothes that projected stability and maternal competence, while hiding the wireless recording device that Agent Mills had provided. Tommy would accompany her as moral support and an additional witness, though his primary job was to observe and remember details that might prove useful later. Remember, Agent Mills coached as they prepared to leave, your goal is to get her to reveal information about her connection to Meridian or her knowledge of David's research. Don't push too hard or ask obvious questions, just let her talk and see what she volunteers. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover for the surveillance team, but not so crowded that conversations couldn't be heard clearly. Tommy and Maria chose a table near the back where they could see the entrance while Agent Mills positioned herself at the counter with a newspaper and a clear view of their table. David's alleged sister arrived precisely on time, and Tommy felt his suspicions confirmed the moment she walked through the door. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in control of situations. More tellingly, she moved through the coffee shop like someone who had studied the layout in advance, her eyes automatically checking exits and sight lines before focusing on their table. "Maria," she said as she approached, "I'm Jennifer Reeves." Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Maria stood and shook the woman's hand, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Reeves, I have to admit, I'm surprised to hear from you. David never mentioned having a sister. Jennifer's smile was practiced and sympathetic. I'm not surprised. David and I were estranged for many years due to family disagreements. I only learned about his death and the existence of his children recently. Through whom? Tommy asked, extending his hand. I'm Tommy Rodriguez, by the way. A friend of Maria's. Jennifer shook his hand, her grip firm and her eye contact steady. Through Meridian Pharmaceuticals, actually. They contacted me when they learned I was David's next of kin. Tommy exchanged a quick glance with Maria, noting how easily Jennifer had admitted the Meridian connection. Either she was remarkably careless or she didn't consider it problematic to reveal her association with the company. Meridian contacted you? Maria asked. Why would they do that? They were concerned about the children's welfare, Jennifer replied, settling into her chair. Apparently, David had made some provisions for them before his death, and the company wanted to ensure those provisions were properly executed. What kind of provisions? Maria asked. Jennifer's expression became more guarded. That's something I'd prefer to discuss after we've resolved the custody situation. There are significant financial considerations involved, and I want to make sure the children's interests are properly protected. Tommy felt anger building at the woman's casual assumption that she would gain custody of children she had no legitimate claim to. Ms. Reeves, I have to ask, if you were estranged from David for years, how do you know anything about his intentions regarding Carlos and Elena? David reached out to me shortly before his death, Jennifer said smoothly. He was concerned about some problems at work and wanted to make sure someone in the family would look after his children if anything happened to him. Problems at work? Maria asked. What kind of problems? I think you know, Jennifer said, her tone becoming more direct. David discovered some irregularities in the company's safety protocols. He was quite upset about it. Tommy watched Jennifer carefully, noting the way she seemed to be testing how much Maria knew about David's research. Did he share details about these irregularities? Some, Jennifer replied. Enough to understand that he was in a difficult position. Companies like Meridian don't appreciate employees who rock the boat. And you think that's connected to his death? Maria asked. Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. Maria, I think we both know that David's car accident was very convenient timing for Meridian. But that's not something we should discuss in a public place. Tommy felt a chill at the casual way Jennifer acknowledged what amounted to a murder conspiracy. Either she was incredibly reckless or she was deliberately trying to gauge their reactions to increasingly inflammatory statements. Ms. Reeves, Maria said carefully, if you believe David was killed because of his research, why would you want to work with Meridian to gain custody of his children? Jennifer's mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Because, Maria, those children represent significant value to certain interested parties. David's research was worth billions of dollars, and his documentation of Meridian's problems could destroy the company. The people who control that information have considerable influence. Are you saying you're working with Meridian to suppress David's research? Tommy asked directly. Jennifer studied him for a moment, apparently deciding how much to reveal. I'm saying that there are ways to resolve this situation that benefit everyone involved. The children receive financial security. You receive compensation for your cooperation, and certain sensitive information remains confidential. And if we refuse? Maria asked. Jennifer's smile became predatory. Then we proceed with the custody hearing, and you lose the children anyway. But without the financial benefits that cooperation would provide. Tommy felt everything click into place. Jennifer wasn't just a fake relative hired to gain custody of the twins. She was a negotiator, sent to offer Maria a deal in exchange for abandoning the federal investigation. The custody hearing was leverage designed to force Maria into a position where cooperation seemed like the lesser of two evils. "How much?" Maria asked quietly. "Excuse me? How much is Meridian offering for my cooperation and David's research?" Jennifer named a figure that made Tommy's breath catch. It was enough money to ensure that Maria and the twins would never have to worry about financial security again. Enough to buy a house in any neighborhood they wanted and pay for college educations and medical care for the rest of their lives. "That's a substantial offer," Maria said neutrally. "It is," Jennifer agreed, "and it comes with guarantees. Clean identities, relocation assistance, legal protection. You could start over anywhere you wanted, completely free from the stress and danger of this federal investigation." Tommy watched Maria's face, unable to read her expression. The offer was genuinely tempting, especially for someone who had spent years struggling financially while raising two young children alone. The money would solve every practical problem they faced, and the protection would eliminate the constant fear of retaliation. "I need to think about it," Maria said finally. "Of course," Jennifer replied. "But I hope you'll consider the children's best interests. This investigation could drag on for years, during which they'll be living under federal protection, unable to have normal lives or form stable relationships. The custody hearing is scheduled to begin in 40 minutes. After that, the situation becomes much more complicated." Jennifer stood and gathered her purse, her professional demeanor returning. "I'll be in the courthouse lobby if you decide you'd like to discuss terms. But Maria, please remember that this offer won't remain available indefinitely. Meridian's patience has limits." After Jennifer left, Tommy and Maria sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Agent Mills approached their table, her expression grim. "Did you get all that?" Tommy asked. "Every word," Agent Mills confirmed. "We have enough evidence of bribery and conspiracy to add federal charges against both Jennifer and Meridian. The question is whether we proceed with the custody hearing or use this evidence to negotiate from a position of strength." Maria stared out the coffee shop window, watching Jennifer walk toward the courthouse. "She's right about one thing," she said quietly. "This investigation could take years. Is that fair to Carlos and Elena?" "Maria," Tommy said gently, "you can't seriously be considering their offer." "I'm considering my children's welfare," Maria replied. "What kind of life will they have if we spend the next 5 years fighting Meridian in court? Always looking over our shoulders, never feeling safe, never able to trust anyone." "But if you take their money, David's research disappears," Tommy pointed out. "All those people who died from Medimax, all the future patients who could be saved by exposing Meridian's practices, none of that matters anymore." Maria turned to look at him, tears threatening in her eyes. "And if I don't take their money, my children grow up in witness protection, traumatized by years of legal battles and corporate retaliation. How is that fair to them?" Agent Mills sat down at their table, her expression sympathetic. "Maria, I understand the pressure you're feeling. But I need you to know that if you take Meridian's offer, you'll be signing away more than David's research. You'll be giving them permission to continue practices that will kill more people. And if I don't take their offer, then we fight," Agent Mills said simply. "And we win. The evidence we've gathered is stronger than Meridian realizes, and their desperation is making them careless. This recording, combined with David's documentation, gives us everything we need to bring criminal charges that will stick." Tommy reached across the table and took Maria's hand. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you. But you need to know that you're not alone in this fight anymore. Sophie cares about Carlos and Elena like they're her own siblings. I care about all three of you more than I ever expected to. And Agent Mills has resources and determination that Meridian can't match." Maria squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. "David always said that doing the right thing was rarely the easy thing. I think this is what he meant," She stood up from the table, her decision made. "Agent Mills, let's go expose these people for what they are." As they walked toward the courthouse, Tommy felt both pride and fear warring in his chest. They were about to take on one of the most powerful corporations in the world, armed with nothing but truth and the determination to protect two small children who had no idea. They were at the center of a battle that could reshape an entire industry. But for the first time since this all began, Tommy believed they could win. The courthouse erupted in chaos as Agent Mills played the recording of Jennifer's confession to the packed courtroom. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked repeatedly as reporters scrambled for better positions and Meridian's legal team huddled in emergency consultation. Jennifer sat frozen in the witness chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as her own words echoed through the speakers, admitting to bribery, conspiracy, and knowledge of David's suspicious death. "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor announced, "based on this evidence, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is prepared to file criminal charges against Jennifer Walsh, whose real name we've confirmed through fingerprint analysis for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted bribery of a federal witness." Tommy watched from the gallery as Maria held Carlos and Elena close, both twins finally understanding that the scary lady who claimed to be their family was actually trying to hurt them. Sophie sat beside them, one small hand on Elena's shoulder, whispering reassurances in the mixture of English and Spanish she'd learned over the past month. Judge Harrison called for order as Meridian's attorneys requested an emergency recess. "Motion denied," she said firmly. "This court will hear the FBI's evidence regarding the fraudulent custody petition immediately." Agent Mills took the stand with devastating efficiency. She presented documentation proving Jennifer Walsh was a corporate security contractor with no biological relationship to David Reeves. Phone records showed a money trail leading directly from Meridian's executive offices to Walsh's consulting firm. Most damning of all, she revealed that Meridian had been monitoring Maria's movements for 6 months, not just since David's death. "The corporation's interest in these children has nothing to do with family welfare," Agent Mills testified. "It stems entirely from their knowledge that David Reeves documented safety violations that could result in criminal prosecution and civil liability exceeding $20 billion. The Meridian legal team's desperation became palpable as their arguments dissolved under the weight of evidence. Their lead counsel, a silver-haired man who'd clearly never expected to be defending corporate murder in family court, made increasingly frantic objections that Judge Harrison overruled with visible disgust. When the prosecutor called Maria to testify, she approached the witness stand with quiet dignity. Her voice never wavered as she detailed David's final months, his growing concerns about Medimax, and his fears that Meridian would retaliate against anyone who threatened their profits. "David told me that if anything happened to him, I should protect the twins above everything else," Maria said. "He said powerful people would try to use them, and I should never trust anyone who claimed to be acting in the children's best interests, while working with the very company he'd died trying to expose." Tommy felt pride surge through him as Maria described their journey from Los Angeles, her medical challenges, and the kindness of strangers who'd helped them find safety. When she mentioned his name, explaining how a single dad in a small town had opened his door without asking questions, several jury members wiped their eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez didn't help us because he thought we were valuable," Maria continued. "He helped us because we needed help. That's the difference between real family and people who want to exploit children for corporate gain." The final blow came when Agent Mills presented evidence that Medimax had caused 37 documented deaths since its release, with Meridian's internal communications showing they'd known about the fatal allergic reactions from the beginning. David's research wasn't just whistleblowing. It was a smoking gun that could bring down the entire company. Judge Harrison's ruling was swift and uncompromising. She dismissed the custody petition as fraudulent, issued a restraining order preventing Meridian from any contact with Maria or the twins, and ordered the corporation to surrender all surveillance materials to federal authorities. This court finds that Meridian Pharmaceuticals has engaged in a coordinated campaign of harassment, fraud, and intimidation against a grieving mother and her innocent children, Judge Harrison declared. Any future attempts to interfere with this family's welfare will result in immediate contempt charges and criminal referral. As they left the courthouse, Maria was surrounded by reporters shouting questions about David's research and Meridian's cover-up. Agent Mills guided them through the crowd while Tommy carried Elena and Sophie held Carlos's hand, all of them working together to shield the children from the chaos of sudden public attention. 6 months later, Tommy's apartment had returned to something resembling normal, though normal now included twice as many children's voices and exponentially more laughter. The federal investigation had expanded into a full Department of Justice prosecution, with congressional hearings scheduled and multiple class action lawsuits filed on behalf of Medimax victims. Maria had used her whistleblower reward money to purchase the house next door to Tommy's building, close enough for the children to run back and forth between homes, but separate enough for both families to maintain their independence. The twins' diabetes management had improved dramatically under the care of Dr. Martinez, who'd become something of a local hero for his willingness to testify against pharmaceutical corporate practices. Sophie had started a club at school called Kids Helping Kids that raised money for families dealing with medical crises. Carlos had finally begun speaking confidently in English, while Elena had appointed herself as the official translator for any visiting relatives who spoke only Spanish. Mrs. Patterson had somehow become an honorary grandmother to all 4 children, despite insisting she was too young for such responsibilities. On the anniversary of the custody hearing, Tommy found Maria sitting on her front porch watching the children play in the shared yard between their houses. Sophie was teaching the twins an elaborate game involving painted rocks and complex rules that seemed to change every few minutes, while a golden retriever puppy that Maria had surprised them with for Christmas bounded between them with endless enthusiasm. "Any regrets?" Tommy asked, settling into the chair beside her. Maria considered the question while monitoring Elena's attempt to explain the rock game rules to the increasingly confused puppy. About turning down Meridian's money? Not for a second. About putting the kids through all that stress? Sometimes. "They seem to have recovered pretty well," Tommy observed. "Better than recovered," Maria agreed. "They're thriving. Carlos told me yesterday that he wants to be a scientist like his Papa David when he grows up, so he can make sure medicine helps people instead of hurting them." Tommy felt his throat tighten at the idea of Carlos carrying on David's legacy in his own small way. "And Elena?" "Elena wants to be a teacher like Sophie when she grows up, so she can help kids who are scared learn how to be brave." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children create the kind of memories that would shape their understanding of family, loyalty, and the importance of fighting for what's right. The legal battles would continue for years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Meridian was facing criminal prosecution, regulatory sanctions, and civil liability that would fundamentally reshape how pharmaceutical companies operated. "Tommy," Maria said eventually, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For seeing us as people instead of problems when we showed up at your door. For trusting your instincts about what was right instead of what was safe. For teaching Sophie to be the kind of person who offers her friendship without conditions." Tommy watched Sophie demonstrate proper rock painting technique while the twins listened with rapt attention, and the puppy attempted to eat their art supplies. "I think Sophie was already that kind of person. She just needed the right situation to show it." "Maybe," Maria said. "But she learned it somewhere. Children don't develop that kind of instinctive kindness by accident." Agent Mills had told them that the Meridian prosecutions would likely result in the largest pharmaceutical company dissolution in corporate history, with assets redistributed to victim compensation funds and medical research foundations. David's research had been vindicated, his death officially reclassified as suspicious, and his work would continue through scientists who now understood the importance of prioritizing patient safety over profit margins. But for Tommy, the real victory was much simpler. It was the sound of 4 children's laughter filling the evening air, the knowledge that 2 families had found each other through circumstances that could have destroyed them both, and the certainty that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply open your door when someone needed shelter from the storm. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Tommy of the autumn evening when everything had changed, he realized that the best stories weren't the ones that ended with dramatic courtroom victories or corporate villains brought to justice. The best stories were the ones that ended with family dinners around crowded tables, bedtime stories read to sleepy children who felt safe enough to dream, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that kindness, given freely and without expectation of reward, could still change the world one small gesture at a time. The porch light stayed on, not because anyone was lost anymore, but because home was a place worth illuminating for anyone who might need to find their way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.